Jerusalem is Israel's capital.
President Trump is a believer, and so am I. And we understand the role of faith in the life of this nation.
He has surrounded himself with wonderful men and women of God, and as a nation, we must come together through prayer, our faith, and action.
And good evening, and thank you for joining us for this CBN News special edition of Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup. Well, it was just over a year ago when President Trump took office. Tonight, we're exploring the impact of his administration here in Washington, as well as overseas in Israel. Joining me here in the nation's capital are Faith Nation co-hosts David Brody and Jenna Browder, and from Jerusalem, CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, it's been a bit of a busy week for you and your crew in Israel.
Certainly was, John. We were embedded with Vice President Mike Pence as part of the press pool. And after the White House recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital in December, President Trump sent Vice President Mike Pence to the Middle East last week with a mission to stand with Israel and to reassure Arab allies that the U.S. has a vision for peace. In the eyes of many, he did both with grace and confidence. Before Air Force Two ever sit down in the Middle East, the Vice President talked with CBN's David Brody about the reason for his trip.
If the world knows nothing else, the world should know this. Under President Donald Trump, America stands with Israel. And we'll be delivering that strong message. It was 70 years ago that the nation of Israel, in a miracle of history, came back into existence in its ancient homeland, and every day Americans have cherished that accomplishment, and we'll be there to celebrate that.
And celebrate he did, earning high praise from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is the first time that I stand here where both leaders can say those three words, Israel's capital, Jerusalem.
Pence became the first U.S. vice president ever to be invited to address the Knesset. He kept his cool when Israeli Arab demonstrators protested the U.S. policy change toward Jerusalem.
It is deeply humbling for me to stand before this vibrant democracy.
He shared his heart, along with his reverence for the scriptures pertaining to Israel, and firmly restated the new U.S. policy.
Jerusalem is Israel's capital. And as such, President Trump has directed the State Department to immediately begin preparations to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Israeli President Reuven Rivlin called the Vice President a mensch, a very high compliment in Yiddish, meaning a person of integrity. Emotional visits to Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial, and his prayers at the Western Wall sealed a visit like few others in the history of American diplomacy.
And the reason is that this administration is putting its embassy where its mouth is. For years and years, U.S. presidents and vice presidents, secretaries of state have all said, given lip service to Jerusalem as being the capital of Israel, but we never put it into practice. And this administration is saying that it will put it into practice. This has the potential to be the most significant visit by a vice president to any nation in recent U.S. history.
Pence also promised change is coming to the U.S.-signed nuclear deal with Iran. That will put Washington on a collision course with European allies who are doing big business with Iran. And with boycotts and curses, Palestinian leaders have set a hostile course against Washington on the international stage. But the coming debate will show the U.S. and Israel largely united over the city King David made his capital more than 3,000 years ago.
Chris, this White House wanted to give peace a chance in the Middle East between the Israelis and Palestinians. So is it your sense now there really is no chance of this because of the embassy decision? What's your sense, Chris?
Well, David, it's hard to say that never, but I think we're in uncharted waters right now after the decision by President Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, to move the embassy, especially as after Vice President Mike Pence's trip. President Trump said in Davos that the Palestinians disrespected the vice president. I think Trump takes that very seriously. He also said the money is on the table, and I think that means that the aid given to the Palestinians for decades is at risk for the Palestinians. They really need to pay attention to what President Trump is doing. I don't think they've ever come across a leader like President Trump who is really taking the issues to them.
Chris, don't take this the wrong way, but in your many, many years of covering past administrations, have you ever seen a closer relationship between this White House and the Israeli government? This is pretty special here.
Very special. I don't think there's been any administration closer than them, and especially after the Obama administration of 8 years of turmoil and discord between the two leaders, Netanyahu and Obama. So this is really uncharted waters as well. The closeness of these two administrations is really powerful.
Chris, let me ask you one follow-up question on the Knesset. Obviously, so many biblical references there. It was pretty fascinating to see. How did it play on the streets of Jerusalem?
Well, my colleague Julie Stahl, she went to the streets of Jerusalem, and she went to hear what people had to say, both in Damascus Gate and in Mahane Yehuda.
We spoke to Jewish Israeli residents of Jerusalem at Mahane Yehuda, the city's open-air market. What do you think about President Trump's declaration that Jerusalem's the capital of Israel?
I feel that he supports the state of Israel not only by words, by deeds.
Jerusalem has been our capital for many years, and I think for centuries. I think it's about time that a president declared it and recognized it.
Finally, we have a president that has the guts to say the truth.
I'm for it 100%. I'm a fan of the President Trump, definitely on that.
So what do you think about the visit of Mike Pence, of the vice president?
He created a tremendous traffic in the city. That's one thing, okay? I think it was a positive step from the America, administration.
He identifies so close with Israel, with our struggles, with our problems. We are very grateful for his understanding.
I think it was a very historical moment in our history. I believe he was the first vice president to be invited to speak at the Israeli Knesset. I think he did an amazing job. He was very respectful, and I think that it just made our ties with the United States of America even stronger.
We also spoke to Arab residents of Jerusalem near the old city's Damascus Gate. What do you think about President Trump's declaration about Jerusalem?
Of course, it's wrong.
Yeah.
That's not good from him to say that and to do that.
When President Trump declares this as the eternal capital of Israel, like he's asking himself or he's giving himself a license to rewrite history.
What about the visit of Vice President Pence?
The way I saw it is adding insult to injury. It just added more fuel to the fire.
Well, Jerusalem, it's for the whole world. I don't see what's wrong, but I could say one thing, God bless America.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Julie, for that report. Lawmakers here in Washington are working to pass a measure called the Taylor Force Act. Chris, as I understand, this bill aims to cut American taxpayer dollars to the Palestinian Authority.
That's right, John. Some in Washington want to cut funding to the Palestinian Authority unless it stops paying deadly terrorists.
What would you say if you found out your tax dollars were indirectly going to pay Palestinian terrorists to murder Israeli Jews and others? That's just what's happening.
Since 2003, it has been Palestinian law to reward Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails with a monthly paycheck. Palestinian leadership also pays the families of Palestinian prisoners and suicide bombers.
The practice is known as pay to slay. The Taylor Force Act gets its name from the American combat veteran murdered while on a school trip in Israel. The 21-year-old terrorist behind the brutal stabbing of Force was killed by police, but he was praised by the Palestinian Authority government and his family given lifelong financial compensation. Kinds of compensation include pension for life, triple the average salary in Palestinian areas, free tuition, health insurance, and a clothing allowance for life, and a free monthly stipend. And that's where this current legislation draws the line. Congressman Ed Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, says stopping that practice, courtesy of $300 million U.S. tax dollars every year, is what's behind the Taylor Force Act.
With this legislation, we are forcing the PA to choose between U.S. assistance and these morally reprehensible policies.
Despite earlier pressure from Congress to stop these payments, the Palestinian Authority has actually increased the amount paid to terrorists whom they consider martyrs. The payments are on a sliding scale. The more successful the attack, the bigger the payout.
This year, direct funding of terrorism has reached $355 million, and yet the PA is largely funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars.
The Palestinian Authority claims to its people that they have a right to kill Israelis. Literally, a right to kill Israeli civilians, a right to kill women, children, babies. And they claim that a UN decision from the 1970s, which said that the Palestinians have the right to use all means to gain their rights, means they have a right to kill civilians.
Palestinian Media Watch director Itamar Marcus said while Israel has means to crack down on terrorists, the West can play a major role.
The Palestinian Authority is so dependent on foreign aid. The United States gives them foreign aid. The European Union gives them foreign aid. Most of the Western European countries give them. They have the power to stop this.
The House Foreign Affairs Committee passage of the Taylor Force Act aims to do just that.
So what's next? The Taylor Force Act heads to the Senate for a vote, and that's the last step before it can be signed by President Trump.
So what are the odds it passes in the Senate? Our Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson asked Congressman Ron DeSantis about it and other issues on the Hill.
So Congressman DeSantis, thank you so much for being with us. I just first want to ask you, what is the likelihood of the Senate voting on and passing the Taylor Force Act?
Well, it should be very good. I mean, Taylor Force is really, I think, a no-brainer. When you have American tax dollars go into an entity that's actually funding families of terrorists who kill Americans and who kill Israeli Jews, that is a totally inappropriate use of tax dollars. It's really a slap in the face to the American taxpayer, and we need to finally start holding Palestinian Arabs accountable for their terrorism.
And where do you think U.S. and Israel relations stand now?
Well, what a difference a year makes. I mean, you remember December 2016, the Obama administration was pushing through a really anti-Israel resolution at the UN 2334, which said even things like the Western Wall in the old city of Jerusalem was occupied Arab territory. That passed. The U.S. obviously normally would have vetoed that. And I think our relationship was really at an all-time low. Well, fast forward now, I mean, with President Trump, he is standing behind Israel as one of our key allies. He's also working with the Arab countries who are now themselves starting to work with Israel. And then, of course, his historic recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital. Other presidents have promised that. This president delivered.
And another big issue you've been working on is bringing an end to these so-called congressional hush funds for the sexual harassment cases. Where does that stand now?
So there is a bill moving forward that incorporates my bill to eliminate the slush fund, which I think is good. But that's only one step. I mean, you know, there's been a lot of secret payments made over the last 20 years, and I think the American taxpayer has a right to know what their money was being spent on. You can't have this stuff. You know, if a victim wants to remain anonymous, that's one thing, but you can't shield the member who may have committed misconduct from their constituents knowing what happened. So I'm obviously supportive of eliminating the slush fund going forward for member misconduct, but I think we have to open the books on this thing so the taxpayer knows how their money was spent.
My final question, you've also launched an investigation into whether or not the Obama administration purposefully undermined law enforcement in their research against Hezbollah during the Iran deal. Where does that stand now?
We are getting really significant witnesses to come forward. They want to talk. And it's been so significant, and we haven't even done a hearing yet, but the Justice Department has now opened a parallel investigation. Look, at the end of the day, giving terrorist groups a free pass is terrible policy. We can't do it. You need to hold Hezbollah accountable, whether it's money laundering, drug running, it doesn't matter. So this gives us an opportunity to identify what happened, what the Obama administration did wrong, but then correct it going forward.
Well, Congressman DeSantis, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Up next, Christ and the President's Cabinet. We'll take you inside the West Wing Bible study attracting some of the biggest names in the Trump administration.
In uncertain times, nothing matters like the truth. That's the strength of CBN News. We pursue stories that make a difference.
Political situation in this country has been tumultuous.
From the world's most powerful city
The White House asked for emergency Zika funding
to its biblical center.
2 mortars just hit. One was about 300 yards away.
No other Christian organization puts the resources and experience into covering the news you care about.
That's the power of CBN News.
I got a phone call that Zach had been in an accident.
He had some of the deepest electrical injuries I had ever seen.
The doctor told us he's not gonna make it. And we were saying, come on, Zach, come back to us, Zach. And that's like the minute the prayers started.
See miraculous stories like this in Answered Prayer. Pat Robertson's latest teaching uncovers the keys to help you get results, break down barriers, and build dynamic faith to receive your answered prayer. Available now.
Well, from DACA to defeating ISIS to limiting government regulations, just over a year into his role, President Trump has delivered on many of his campaign promises.
For sure, Jenna. And Amber Strong highlights some of his major moves.
I, Donald John Trump.
And with that, the new president proceeded to use his pen and new administration to rewrite Obama-era policies.
We've been talking about this for a long time.
One of the first moves, pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement and cutting strict EPA regulations. It caused an uproar with environmentalists at home and abroad, but economists are singing his praises, pointing to a strong economy and record highs in the stock market.
We have a Trump bounce with the economy, and now we're going to call it a Trump moon bounce.
Then, however, came a bump in the road.
To repeal and replace Obamacare.
It didn't happen, as an attempt to get rid of the Affordable Care Act died in the Senate and remains the law of the land. But with the first major tax overhaul in 30 years, Trump's reform plan put the scalpel to Obamacare.
We essentially repealed Obamacare because we got rid of the individual mandate, which was terrible.
Then came a surprise against Dreamers with a move against DACA, an Obama executive order protecting children of undocumented immigrants. The president put the ball in Congress's court, but it hasn't moved anywhere.
Senate Democrats are basically conducting a 2-year-old temper tantrum in front of all the American people.
Negotiating with this White House is like negotiating with Jell-O.
And the fight involving the White House, GOP, and Democrats over Dreamers and immigration led to the first government shutdown since 2013. Although it only lasted 3 days, the scenario could repeat itself early February. But President Trump's newfound influence didn't only cause shockwaves at home.
And you're the first acting president who's done that.
Trump made history by visiting the Holy Land in his first year, on what has been billed as the World Religion Tour of Saudi Arabia, Vatican City, and Israel. He met with leaders from those countries, plus Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, hoping to improve U.S.-Israel relations. Perhaps the most unsung, or at least uncovered, accomplishment is the defeat of ISIS. In December, Iraqi forces, along with help from the U.S., declared victory over the terror group when they secured control of the Iraqi-Syrian border.
You're fired.
A lot of people came and a lot of people went. In Trump's first year, there were more resignations and firings than his 2 last predecessors. Some former employees now face criminal charges stemming from the FBI's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 campaign and possible collusion. A cloud that still lingers over the administration as Special Counsel Robert Mueller continues to identify key administration figures, possibly including the president. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Well, after years of feeling shut out in the wilderness, evangelical Christians have unprecedented access to the Trump White House, and they are using that influence to weigh in on matters of faith and policy. It's been said that prayer is a hotline straight to heaven. Well, in today's Washington, evangelicals have a direct hotline to the president, and he's listening.
Pastor Jeffers? Yes. Prayer? Let's pray together, may we? Yes.
An Oval Office prayer meeting with Donald Trump is probably the last thing most people expected to see from this presidency, but guess what? It's become somewhat regular as Trump gets both policy advice and prayerful guidance from dozens of evangelicals who make up his Faith Advisory Council.
We have this open door. When the president asked us to pray, the media went wild and people flipped out when that picture of us praying with the president went viral on the internet. And they would have freaked out even more if they knew this wasn't an irregular occasion, right? This was like a normal thing.
Normal includes weekly, sometimes daily phone calls with the president and close advisors like Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. The straw stirring this access is longtime family friend and pastor Paula White. As head of the Faith Council, she's in constant contact with the president and his team, looking for solutions that bring faith into the equation. Already in 2018, they're shaping the issue of criminal justice reform. But White says that's just the beginning.
There should be some things rolling out early part of the year that will have about 6 initiatives and exciting things that if we thought we did some things last year, boy, wait until this year.
An executive order promoting free speech and religious liberty even led to a special moment for evangelicals.
It's so great to be doing it in the Rose Garden. How beautiful is that? It was looking like you'd never get here, folks, but you got here.
And this connection isn't just happening behind the scenes.
Well, Mr. President, I'm so glad to see you. I'm so proud of everything you're doing. Let me ask you, you have...
CBN News has interviewed the president twice so far. Only Fox News has more television interviews. Mr. President, thank you for inviting CBN News here into the White House, the People's House. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David.
Let's start with the Supreme. We should also mention interviews with the Vice President, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. All in all, it's led to an all-access pass for evangelicals not seen to this degree in American presidential history.
Incredible access. David, Jenna, how is the newfound access playing out in the media?
Well, it's interesting. There have been some silent stares, some angry stares, quite frankly, there in the White House briefing room. I can tell you that, for example, Jim Acosta one time, I remember asking that first question of Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump at the press conference back in February of 2017. And Jim, who's, amiable guy, nice guy, kind of looked at me and kind of gave me a bit of a look saying, you got to be kidding. You got to ask a question. So I thought that was interesting for sure.
And then just a few months later, we ran into him again and he goes up to David and he says, hey, who are you interviewing today? And David says, oh, we're not interviewing anybody. We're just meeting off the record with Ivanka. So right. I think they know pretty well, John, that CBN News is incredible access to this administration.
For sure.
Well, Jenna, from access to executive orders on religious liberty, Trump isn't taking for granted the support of evangelicals that helped get him into the White House. What are some of the accomplishments that evangelicals are singing his praises about most loudly?
I don't think it's a stretch at all to say this is the most evangelical-friendly president we have ever seen. Mm-hmm. And so, John, we are talking about nominating Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, his stance on abortion and being willing to fight it. These are all things that keep evangelicals totally behind President Trump.
David, we only have a little less than 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
What about the response or the controversy that sometimes evangelicals aren't pushing back or confronting President Trump on questions of morality?
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate contention out there, and people have said that before. Look, I think ultimately evangelicals know where their policy and moral bread is buttered. And what I mean by that simply is they look at the macro. They say, look, we have a choice. Do we whisper in this president's ear on the moral issues of the day, or do we stay on the sidelines? And they believe they have this president's ear, so that's exactly what they're going to do, and whether it be on policy or anything else for that matter.
It's been called the most evangelical cabinet in history. Men and women who don't mince words when it comes to where they stand on God and the Bible.
These are godly individuals that God has risen to a position of prominence in our culture.
All handpicked by President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence.
I don't think Donald Trump's figured out that he chained himself to the Apostle Paul.
Ralph Drollinger is a former NBA-playing giant of a man with an even bigger calling. He founded Capitol Ministries with the idea that if you change the hearts of lawmakers, then their Christian worldview will guide them to make good policies. He's started Bible studies in 40 state capitals, teaches weekly studies in the U.S. House and Senate,
and now leads about a dozen members of President Trump's cabinet in weekly studies of the Bible. Energy Secretary Rick Perry, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, and CIA Director Mike Pompeo are just a few of the regulars.
It's the best Bible study I've ever taught in my life. They are so teachable, they're so noble, they're so learned.
Has this been done before in a cabinet
I don't
formally?
think there's been a cabinet Bible study in America in at least 100 years.
America's top cop, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, also attends.
Like Jeff Sessions, he'll go out the same day I teach him something and I'll see him do it on camera. And I just think, man, these guys are faithful, available, and teachable, and they're at Bible study every week they're in town.
President Trump is invited to attend the Bible studies too. Each week he receives a copy of Drollinger's teachings, and when he can, Vice President Mike Pence will join the study. In Pence, Drollinger sees similarities to Joseph, Mordecai, and Daniel from the Bible, all men who rose to the number 2 position in governments at different times in history.
Mike Pence has respect for the office. He dresses right, like it says Joseph, cleaned himself up before he went to stand before the Pharaoh. Mike Pence has uncompromising biblical tenacity, and yet a loving tone about him that's not just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And then fourthly, he brings real value to the head of the nation.
Like others, Drollinger often compares President Trump to biblical strongman Samson.
I just praise God for them, and I praise God for Mike Pence, who I think, with Donald Trump, chose great people to lead our nation.
Jennifer, I want to know, can you give us a little more background? How do these Bible studies work, and also give us a clue about what the cabinet members are studying right now?
Sure. Well, it's pretty simple. Ralph Drollinger takes members of the cabinet through the Bible, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. Right now, they're actually in Matthew chapter 7, which our Bible readers out there know has a lot of wisdom to unpack. Drollinger also, every week of the year, writes original Bible studies that he gives to members. And these are about, how to keep your marriage strong while you're running part of the government, or issues that they may be dealing with, such as what does the Bible say about marriage, or what does the Bible say about capital punishment?
Interesting. Hey, Jennifer, what kind of a relationship does Ralph Drollinger actually have with the president and vice president?
Well, Drollinger has known Mike Pence since his days as a U.S. congressman. They've had a relationship there, and it was actually Pence who gave Drollinger the green light to do this Bible study, which has been in the works since the Trump transition. So there's a relationship there, and the president actually receives a copy of Drollinger's weekly Bible studies, and sometimes Ralph tells me he'll write a note to him and give it back to him, which is, we know, the way that the president often communicates with people. So that's kind of interesting. And the president has a standing invitation to join the Bible study any week of the year.
Jennifer, since you broke the story, I know there's been some fallout, especially lately from atheists. Why are some activists so opposed to this?
Well, they're shining a lot of light in places where light hasn't been in a while. That's the easy answer. But these atheists are targeting members of the cabinet who attend these studies. They're sending FOIA requests trying to see what kind of correspondence there is between Drollinger and the cabinet secretaries. They're actually suing a federal agency over this, and Drollinger and his ministry think that this stems from false reports by the New York Times and others who followed our reporting that say that he's a Christian nationalist, which means that he believes in a Christian-controlled government, which really, if you look at any of his writings, you know that is just categorically false. He believes that God created the state separate from the church, and that is just what he believes. That's what he preaches. Actually, this week, starting tomorrow, he's releasing a 16-page Bible study that is entitled "The Fallacy of Christian Nationalism."
Very interesting. Well, Jennifer Wishon, let's talk about a story that has legs. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Look, Jennifer's Bible study report is really a great example of the stories that CBN News works to bring our viewers.
Yeah, and our show, Faith Nation, we not only bring you the stories, but we want to share and interact with you. So connect with us on Wednesdays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can catch Faith Nation on CBN News Facebook page. We're live at that time, engaging with viewers. People leave comments and questions, and we connect and we try to answer them on air. So make sure you check out Faith Nation. Again, that's Wednesday beginning at 12:30 Eastern Time at facebook.com/CBN News.
President Donald Trump made history as the first commander-in-chief to address the annual March for Life event live via video feed. CBN's Ben Kennedy was there and joins us.
Hey guys, President Trump said that every child is a precious gift from God during his speech from the Rose Garden. It is there he spoke to pro-life supporters via a satellite from the White House. In fact, you can see him right there talking to a very large crowd in Washington, D.C. He said that because of the March for Life, tens of thousands of people have been born and able to reach their God-given potential.
You all come for one beautiful cause, to build a society where life is celebrated, protected, and cherished. The March for Life is a movement born out of love.
Even though President Trump was the first commander-in-chief to make a live address, two other presidents, George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, also made remarks during the March for Life during their time in office. David, Jenna, John.
Thank you, Ben. Well, January 22nd marks the day the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide. But this year, President Trump struck back at that court decision by declaring this January 22nd National Sanctity of Human Life Day. He says science now lets us see, quote, images of the unborn children moving their newly formed fingers, toes, yawning, and even smiling. And those images show precious, unique lives, each deserving a future filled with promise and hope. Well, pro-life leaders often cite President Trump's nominations as one of his top accomplishments. He picked Neil Gorsuch, a solid pro-life constitutionalist, for the Supreme Court. Another 18 pro-life judges have been placed on the nation's highest courts. And for his administration, he has picked prominent pro-lifers who can have a major impact on how the federal government deals with abortion, like Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Well, Jenna, the woman in this next story is now a high-profile leader in the pro-life movement. But as an unwed pregnant teen, she decided abortion was her only option.
Now, Paul Strand reports on the horrific scene that unfolded when she changed her mind at the last minute.
Catherine Glenn Foster is a wife and mom who also leads Americans United for Life, one of the premier organizations fighting abortion.
Babies are saved. Millions of babies have been saved by our work.
For her, this isn't political, it's personal. Because Catherine herself suffered an horrific experience at an abortion clinic almost 2 decades ago.
When I was 19 years old, I had an unintended pregnancy. I felt incredibly alone. So I went online, found the second cheapest abortion center I could, made an appointment for that Saturday because I knew that I couldn't wait any longer. I wouldn't have had it in me. I was already bonding. What I found there was coercion, lack of information, at times outright lies, at times force.
As the abortion was about to begin,
I asked to get up. I said, please let me up, let me off this table, out of this room. I don't want this anymore.
Foster first described the shocking experience that followed to CBN News a year ago at a protest outside a Planned Parenthood building.
And I said, no, I can't do this. You know, this is wrong. I feel really bad about this. Let me just go. You can keep the money. And they shouted for more people, and I had 4 people holding me down. One, a nurse, a staff member on each arm. The doctor aborted my child. I'm screaming. You know, that's not choice. It took me a long time to recover. Physically, and then mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It was devastating.
But Catherine pushed on, finished college, then law school. She wed, had kids, and because of what happened to her at that clinic, she took up pro-life legal work and eventually the presidency of Americans United for Life. She's particularly proud of one state law championed by her group.
The state of Wyoming just last session passed its first pro-life law in 28 years. And that law is an ultrasound requirement.
Meaning if an abortion center records an ultrasound with a patient and she asks to see it, they must show her the baby's image, which didn't happen for 19-year-old Catherine.
And I asked and I was refused. They said no. And that's always haunted me. I've always wanted and wished again that I could go back. And knowing that women in Wyoming now have that right is so impactful.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Retaking the Temple Mount, how 6 short days help fulfill a prophecy 2,000 years in the making. That when we return to this Faith Nation special.
In uncertain times, nothing matters like the truth. That's the strength of CBN News. We pursue stories that make a difference.
Political situation in this country has been tumultuous.
From the world's most powerful city.
The White House asked for emergency Zika funding.
To its biblical center.
2 mortars just hit. One was about 300 yards away.
No other Christian organization puts the resources and experience into covering the news you care about.
That's the power of CBN News.
Prayer is a communication with God. It's a powerful exchange between God and man. We're going to answer many of your questions in Answered Prayer, how to pray effectively and see God work in your life.
In Pat Robertson's latest DVD, Answered Prayer, you'll learn the biblical principles of prayer and how to get your prayers answered. And hear miraculous stories of answers to prayer from Pat's own faith-filled journey.
We share some of the lessons that I've learned along the way.
Plus, you'll see dramatic, true stories of life-changing answers to prayer.
God proves himself time and time again.
He's in the room with us, answering people's prayers.
I think I survived because God has a bigger plan for my life.
The doctor was just like, I've never seen anything like this before.
And he hears your prayers.
I never saw this coming.
Every great work of God is preceded by prayer.
Answered Prayer. How to pray effectively and see God work in your life. Call now or go to cbn.com.
2018 is already keeping the U.S. military and intelligence agencies on high alert. Right now, North Korea is a top priority.
For sure, Jenna, especially with South Korea hosting the Winter Olympics next month. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales takes a closer look.
Not long after entering office, President Trump encountered an international challenge confronting North Korea after it tested an intercontinental ballistic missile.
This is a real threat to the world, whether we want to talk about it or not. North Korea is a big world problem.
The North wasn't done. Its dictator Kim Jong-un then ordered a test of its most powerful nuclear weapon yet, a hydrogen bomb, and then ordered a test of a ballistic missile that scientists say could hit anywhere in the continental U.S.
It went higher, frankly, than any previous shot they've taken. It's a research and development effort on their part to continue building ballistic missiles that could threaten everywhere in the world.
Both the United States and the United Nations took action by sanctioning North Korea and threatening those that would do business with it.
Foreign banks will face a clear choice: do business with the United States or facilitate trade with the lawless regime in North Korea, and they won't have so much trade.
Kim Jong-un fired back, calling the president deranged and that the U.S. would pay dearly. During the next provocation, the U.S. military answered with its first successful live-fire intercept, taking down a mock North Korean ICBM.
If they stopped their shooting missiles, stopped developing nukes, stopped building more nukes, we could talk.
CBN News traveled with Defense Secretary James Mattis to NORAD in Colorado as he took an up-close look at the U.S. missile defense system inside the Cheyenne Mountain complex. Mattis told CBN News if North Korea agreed, he would set the conditions to bring the rogue country to the table.
More economic sanctions, diplomatic persona non grata from a number of nations around the world. It's all designed to bring diplomatic and economic pressure on North Korea to change its course.
But whether the North will change remains unclear. That means joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea will continue in the region after the upcoming Winter Olympics. During those games in Seoul, athletes from both the North and South Korea plan to march together under one flag. Some see the North's participation as nothing more than a ploy to buy more time to develop their missile arsenal.
The next steps would be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is our #1 priority and certainly what we would like to see.
And by the way, just this past week, the United States slapped sanctions on 6 North Korean ships, 16 individuals, and 9 companies. that is said to have played a role in Pyongyang's weapons programs. But whether or not these sanctions will face North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons and long-range missiles is yet to be seen. John, we're just all hoping that North Korea will actually face the consequences.
Well, as you just mentioned in your report, North and South Korea will be competing in just a few days under the same flag at the Winter Olympics. No one is under the guise that this is going to solve the growing nuclear crisis. But what's the goal here? Are they trying to drive a wedge between the United States and our close partners in South Korea?
Well, that is a big concern. You know, I did speak to Secretary Mattis about this, and he said that he describes South Korea and the United States like two married couples. We literally can finish each other's sentences. He says the one thing that we do know is that we are all working to have a denuclearized North Korea peninsula.
You know, it's apparent that we're living under a new global order. North Korea is now a nuclear power. This seemed, though, to catch many world leaders and military experts by surprise.
It certainly has. You know, we know that North Korea has not been able to do this technology on its own. We have to look at Russia. We have to look at China. We also have to look at Iran as possibly helping North Korea be able to continue this technology.
Well, Eric, shifting gears here a bit, you've helped develop a new beat here at CBN News as our national security correspondent. Can you tell us what are some of the stories that you're working on now and why it's so important to tell the stories you're covering?
Well, the thing is I just got back literally from just this past week from the border, the U.S.-Mexico border near on the South Texas area, the Rio Grande Valley area. This is an area that is filled with drugs. A number of drugs have been coming over, marijuana, but we're also seeing cocaine and also methamphetamine, along with illegal immigration making its way across. These stories are so important to tell because as Christians, we worry about security. We worry about security for our family. We see what's happening in local churches with terrorist organizations, things like that, lone wolves. So these are the type of stories that I'm going to stay on top of and bring them to you.
Eric Rosales, CBN News National Security Correspondent. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, John.
President Trump went to the Middle East for the first overseas trip of his presidency. And today we are still seeing the ripple effects of that May trip.
Well, for sure. Jenna, at the time we called it the World Religion Tour. We said that a lot because the president visited Saudi Arabia, Israel, Rome. He had a warm welcome in Saudi Arabia where he signed a joint strategic vision calling for more than $100 billion in arms sales, saying it would lead to thousands of American jobs. Well, he delivered an address to Arab and Muslim majority nations as well, asking them to help fight against extremism. And the tough talk against Iran led to a Sunni coalition in the region. Well, then it was on to Israel, where we saw President Trump's strong relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on full display. He also met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, saying peace is possible. The plan to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel wouldn't come for about 7 more months after the spring trip. And then, of course, the president went to the Vatican and met with Pope Francis. So it was clearly a pretty busy tour. Chris Mitchell back with us now from Jerusalem. Chris, some recent comments by President Trump are raising some questions specifically about this comment where he tells Netanyahu right there that at some point Israel will, quote, pay for some sort of Jerusalem decision in the near future when it comes to negotiations with the Palestinians. That's not on the talking points that the White House has been peddling out, Chris.
That's true, David, and he said that at Davos, and I understand from the press reports that Netanyahu's facial expression changed during that time. So we'll see what that happens. He didn't explain it. Nobody knows exactly what the peace plan has, but we'll see in the next few months and what it means that Israel's going to have to pay now that they have Jerusalem, as Trump said, off the table.
Let me ask you about Iran for a moment. How have we seen that whole situation play out since his visit? What's the sense there, Chris?
Well, the sense here right now, practically President Trump has certified the Iranian nuclear deal one more time. He said that's it. In 6 months, he's going to decertify the deal. That's one thing. The other thing that's happened, changing, David, is the fact that now Israel and the United States are on the same page. Netanyahu said it was a disastrous deal. He said, if the U.S. pulls out, we'll stand behind you. One other thing, David, the difference between Obama and Trump is that he's standing with the Iranian people, especially near the latest demonstrations against the regime.
Chris, I want to ask you about Saudi Arabia's role in all of this because it's pretty fascinating as it relates to Mideast politics. I mean, the Trump administration has made a concerted effort to establish some sort of solid relationship with the Saudi family. How crucial is that within the region there?
It's crucial. For decades, David, everybody had the conventional wisdom that if we can solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem, then there'll be peace in the Middle East. Right now, people are recognizing that the relationship with Israel, the United States, the Sunni Arab nations is key to prevent Iran from dominating the Middle East. And I think that's what's behind all this new relationship with Saudi Arabia.
You know, Chris, the World Religion Tour obviously came at right around a pretty historic date for the people of Israel. Isn't that right?
That's right, David. And the president visits come just as Israel's prepared to mark the 50th anniversary of the historic time when they captured Jerusalem's Temple Mount during the 1967 Six-Day War.
On June 7, 1967, Israeli Brigade Commander Moteh Gur made an announcement the Jews had waited to hear for some 2,000 years.
Retaking this ground was important for a number of reasons. For one, it's where King Solomon built the first Jewish temple. After the Babylonians destroyed it, Zerubbabel laid the foundation stone for a second temple that was later expanded by King Herod. It fell at the hands of the Romans in 70 AD. When Commander Gur declared that the Temple Mount was back in Jewish hands, it rekindled hope for a long-awaited Third Temple.
The Six-Day War was a miracle of biblical proportions, and was a cataclysmic opening of a new era for Israel and for the whole world.
Rabbi Chaim Richman of the Temple Institute is dedicated to rebuilding the Jewish temple. He sees the time since the Six-Day War as a prophetic shift.
It would be hard, I think, not to see what's happened in the past 50 years as a tremendous jumpstart, a tremendous fast forward.
The Institute shares a key connection to the battle for Jerusalem. Its founder, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, served with the 55th Paratrooper Brigade that captured the Temple Mount. After the victory, a Jordanian guide gave them a remarkable tour.
He actually, the first night of the liberation of Jerusalem, he was given the task of guarding over the spot of the Dome of the Rock, which of course we believe is the Holy of Holies. The story, though, that he told us is that the soldiers were on the Temple Mount, and it was just like the first hour or so. And they were approached by a Jordanian fellow in Western dress who explained that he was the official tour guide for the Jordanian parliament, and he offered to take the soldiers and show them the sights on the Temple Mount. And he takes the soldiers, you know, the rabbi there, and he says, well, this is exactly where the sanctuary stood. Finally, the rabbi asked him, why are you telling us all this? And he said, well, we have a tradition from our fathers, they from their fathers, that one day the Jews would wage a war and conquer this mountain and rebuild the Holy Temple. And I assume that you're starting tomorrow. And I want this to be my part in helping you.
What was their reaction to that story?
Well, gosh, I guess yes, they were pretty surprised, but the bottom line is, in hindsight, it doesn't look like we were ready.
50 years later, that's changed, with the Temple Institute preparing blueprints and gathering official temple elements, such as the priestly garments. Richman is also dispelling myths about the temple on today's digital loudspeaker, YouTube.
Let's start at the beginning. What was the Holy Temple really all about?
All of this means talk of rebuilding the temple is no longer considered a fringe idea.
Today, there is a lobby in the Knesset of how many members of Knesset that are constantly speaking about Jewish rights to pray on the Temple Mount. There are members of Knesset that actually talk about the rebuilding of the Holy Temple.
So, a few years ago, this was considered fringe?
Zealots, lunatics, peculiar. Today, it's mainstream.
One of those members is Yehuda Glick.
10 years ago, there was not a single member of Knesset who ascended Temple Mount. Today, we have 20 of the Knesset members who are interested in ascending Temple Mount, praying on the Temple Mount, and are part in the battle for the redemption of the Temple Mount.
Richmond sees the temple through the eyes of the prophet Isaiah, who wrote 3,000 years ago that God's house would be a house of prayer for all nations.
It means basically that there's a God in the world and that the best is yet to come, and that we are so connected to Him and to each other and to that purpose and to all humanity. And it's just a wonderful privilege to be here with you today, to be looking out over Jerusalem and to realize that we're living in probably the most important time in history. If you believe in the God of Israel and you see his hand on his people and you understand the tremendous changes that have gone on over the years, you see that the one who brought us this far isn't finished and will keep his promises.
Well, the Six-Day War and the retaking of the Temple Mount changed history forever, and CBN's docudrama, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, chronicles that story. Now, Chris, let's take a look at your coverage of the film's hometown premiere and then come back on the other side to talk reaction.
The film follows the life of several paratroopers as they fought critical battles to reunite the city under Jewish sovereignty for the first time in 2,000 years.
Very excited. It brought me back to the moment when we broke through the Lion's Gate.
The film has been a big hit in the U.S., but how did it play in Israel?
As an Israeli, I must say that I have not seen for a very long time such a great expression of a true storytelling of what really happened here.
It was really inspirational and really amazing to be able to see, especially the old original footage.
It gave you a real sense of how the war was. What a testimonial to Israel.
What I didn't expect was also the feeling that the soldiers have after of losing their comrades and that mourning that they go through. But the film ended with such a high note of Zechariah 8.
The Israeli actors felt honored to be a part of the film.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It was very, very pro-Israel.
It was amazing to feel a part of it.
Some Israelis were surprised that Christians would make such a film to honor Israel.
It's heartwarming. We have friends who care. Yes, I've just learned about it, that Christians love Israel. It was very surprising, a good surprise.
Well, Chris, as a Christian living in Israel, what was it like to be at the premiere? And secondly, how surprised, as you indicated, was the audience that Christians would make a film about Israel?
Well, first of all, John, it was a real privilege to be there representing CBN. CBN Documentaries went ahead and produced that movie, and it was an excellent demonstration, a recreation of what happened 50 years ago. And in terms of surprise, I had friends of mine, Jewish friends, that came up to me literally with tears in their eyes when they saw that movie, that a Christian ministry would go ahead and really celebrate what happened 50 years ago to the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
Chris, I wonder, as In Our Hands made its way before audiences across Israel, what do you think the impact long-term will be on this film?
Well, long-term, I think, John, this just adds, I think, to the growing relationship between Christians and Jews here in Israel. They see evangelical Christians, Christian Zionists, as their best friends here in the world, and I think that just solidifies the relationship. In Our Hands did that last year, and by the way, To Life, which is CBN's documentary coming out for the 70th anniversary of the founding of the Jewish state, will come out, and I think that will add to the sort of the relationship that this long-term relationship that seems to be growing. I've been here almost 20 years, and that's one of the big things that I've seen is this growing relationship between evangelical Christians and the Jewish state.
Chris, always appreciate you. We'll check back with you in a little bit. Jenna, turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, John. Well, for more from Chris Mitchell, be sure to check out Jerusalem Dateline. Every week, Chris and the whole team in our Middle East Bureau work to bring you stories from the region. From ancient discoveries to the dangers of living there, Jerusalem Dateline is your window to Israel and the Middle East. For this week's show and all of the latest episodes, head to cbnnews.com.
Coming up, CBN News travels north across the border to Canada to show you why some parents there are worried about a radical sex ed curriculum and fear that it will cause gender confusion among kids in public schools.
Someone in this room is about to die of heart disease.
Enjoy. Thanks.
Can you guess who it is?
You good?
Because it's not always who you think. 50% of adults who die of heart disease show no prior symptoms. Get the facts. Get Protect Your Heart. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com.
There's something that's missing, and I want to tell you that something missing is Jesus.
It was the beginning of a road of redemption for me.
There's forgiveness, there's a new life, there's everything in trusting God. Just take that one step, that's all it takes.
I felt like a new person.
brand new creation. I felt like I had had a weight lifted off my shoulders.
In Washington, the White House, the Capitol, the monuments, and many other memorials surround the city with so much history.
And that history includes a rich Christian heritage. Ben Kennedy takes us behind the scenes for this look at how you can see the work of God at some of Washington's most historic sites.
In addition to landmarks and lawmakers, Washington, D.C. is full of Christian heritage, especially if you know where to look. In fact, you just have to look up, more than 500 feet in the air.
And on the east face, facing the rising sun, facing the U.S. Capitol, they inscribed simply the words, Laus Deo, praise be to God. In all likelihood, giving praise for the final completion of the memorial after 35 years of construction.
Before construction even began on the iconic Washington Monument, a Bible was placed in the cornerstone.
Mike, how old are these stones?
We're in the lower portion of the monument right now that was built between 1848 and 1854.
The Park Service allowed CBN News inside for a rare sight few people get to see.
That's Noah's Ark.
Correct. That's Noah's Ark. That's the Dove of Peace.
Nearly 200 memorial stones, some depicting scripture, line the dark stairway.
And we're just on the 70th. If we were going all the way, we're a little past 10%.
893 steps to the top.
About halfway up, we've walked around 466 steps. It is a workout, but this stone right here behind me was given by a Sunday school class from Philadelphia all the way back in 1853. In the center is a Bible with the words, "Search the Scriptures" written.
Stones line the wall. Gifts from individuals, cities, countries, and states, including Illinois, the land of Lincoln. Decades after the Washington Monument's completion, the Lincoln Memorial took its place on the mall.
We need to study this because it's a Christian document.
That document is the inaugural address by the nation's 16th president.
What Abraham Lincoln is saying in his second inaugural address is that it's more than brother against brother, family against family, North against South. God brought down the Civil War in order to eradicate slavery.
In the address, Lincoln glorified God, quoting scripture, talking about prayer and the Bible several times.
Both, that's the North and the South, read the same Bible and pray to the same God because both North and South were Christian.
He delivered the speech on March 4th, 1865, 41 days before his assassination. Now, 152 years later, his words are engraved in stone. Also etched in stone along the tidal basin is God's message at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. Just offshore are the words, "Almighty God hath created the mind free," inscribed under the dome. Along another panel is the text, "God who gave us life, gave us liberty." Words taken from a summary view of the rights of British America, highlighting how the Founding Fathers turned to their faith for strength when creating an independent nation under God. It's just one more sign of the Lord's mark in Washington, D.C. For CBN News, I'm Ben Kennedy.
Great report, Ben. Well, as we conclude tonight's Faith Nation special, let's take a moment to look ahead and get some closing thoughts on what we'll be watching as the year progresses. Chris, I wonder, what will you be tracking in 2018?
Well, three things, John. I think, first of all, the peace process, we're going to see where that goes. History is being made by President Trump and the way he's dealing with the Palestinians. We'll see what they do. The second thing would be Iran. There's a showdown coming because of this decertification of the nuclear deal. Also, on the northern border, we see Iran trying to encroach upon Israel. So that could be a flashpoint as well. And finally, I think, John, we should look at prophecy. Looking back at Vice President Pence's speech, he alluded to the Jews coming back to the land. He quoted scripture. So I think we're living in the land of the Bible, and we're going to see prophecy continue unfold here in Jerusalem, in Israel.
Jenna, what will you be watching?
Yeah, John, I am really looking at women in the White House and their role that they'll play in the midterm elections, especially when it comes to appealing to suburban women. This is a block of voters that is so important, and we've seen it in other races, in Alabama, in Virginia, with races being swayed in certain directions because of suburban women. So the women, Ivanka Trump, Paula White, Hope Hicks, what will be their messaging? What policies will they roll out? I'm really keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, and I would say, Jenna, some of my closing thoughts would simply be, you mentioned messaging. What about voter turnout? Evangelicals, crucial in the general election. What about in the midterms? Donald Trump needs evangelicals to show up. If he doesn't, you're looking at a House that could go into Democrats' hands. That means potential impeachment proceedings for this president. And right now, the Republican National Committee is in dire straits when it comes to evangelical outreach. They lost their coordinator there, so they've got some serious work to do. We understand meetings are underway. John, what about you?
I view everything under the prism of one date. That's Tuesday, November 6th, 2018. And that's because every vote that's cast, every statement that's made will be made with the upcoming election in mind. And if history serves as any guide, it's going to be brutal for the GOP. That's because, on average, the party in control of the White House loses about 30 seats. Democrats only need to retake about 25 seats in order to retake control of the House. It's a little bit of a steeper climb in the Senate, but they believe with their recent wins, the president's low public approval rating, and the number of Republicans who are retiring, which is about 30 so far, that it might usher in a blue wave this fall. So I say watch and see the dynamics and the public mood toward Washington. Well, thank you for joining us tonight for this special Faith Nation.